When UFC officials announce the beginning of every new season of The Ultimate Fighter, the MMA community lets out a loud, collective groan. Well over a decade removed from the transformative first season of the reality TV competition, the general consensus is that the show has outgrown its effectiveness. While it still brings eyeballs to FS1 twice a year, those numbers are down, and the perception is that the show that launched the careers of Forrest Griffin, Rashad Evans, Michael Bisping and innumerable others in the early years of the Zuffa-led UFC is no longer the talent factory it once was. But Saturday night's fight card, Santiago, Chile, and a quick comb through the current UFC fighter rankings call that idea into question. Both Kamaru Usman and Tatiana Suarez, who earned the biggest victories of their career in the main event and co-main event respectively this past weekend, arrived in the octagon after emerging victorious on recent seasons of The Ultimate Fighter. Usman won on season 21, while Suarez accomplished the feat 2 seasons later. 2 of the 6 main card bouts featured former tough contestants squaring off against one another, as did one of the televised preliminary card fights, while 4 other graduates from the program stepped into the octagon this past weekend. In total, athletes that matriculated to the UFC through The Ultimate Fighter won 8 of the 13 bouts contested at Movistar Arena on Saturday night. While that might seem like an anomaly or prompt some to question the importance of some of those contests, the reality is that the UFC roster is loaded talent that competed on one iteration of the show or another, including 4 current champions and numerous contenders. Reigning champs Rose Namajunas Season 20, TJ Dillashaw Season 14, and Robert Whittaker, Tough Smashes, each advanced to the finals on their respective seasons, with Bobby Knuckles being the only one of the 3 to walk away with a win. Inaugural women's flyweight title holder Nico Montano is the 4th member of that collective, having run the gauntlet to claim UFC gold on season 26. In addition to Montano, 6 other members of the top 15 in the organization's newest division took part in that championship tournament, while 29 additional Ultimate Fighter alums are currently ranked in the top 15 in their respective divisions, including 5 at lightweight, 5 at strawweight and another 7 in the 185-pound weight class. And that's not including Vicente Luque, who scored a first-round knockout win over another tough alum, Chad Laprise, on Saturday evening and could end up cracking the top 15 in the lightweight division. When the rankings are updated later this week, or Enrique Barzola, who has quietly put together a 4-fight winning streak to stand on the brink of breaking into the rankings at featherweight. While the show is graduating few competitors from each season to the octagon, the truth is that there are a lot of talented athletes who have used The Ultimate Fighter as a means to getting into the UFC and put together impressive careers upon arrival. So why does each new season get greeted with a groan? The problems with The Ultimate Fighter: first and foremost, the format is just too outdated to be interesting anymore. Sure, there are still people who kick back and watch Survivor every week, and The Bachelor continues to do quality ratings, but the novelty of seeing a group of fighters sequestered in a house in Las Vegas, binge drinking and bickering in between training sessions isn't as compelling to nearly as many people now as it was back in those early seasons. Utilizing different weight classes and adding new wrinkles to the casting, like having this season be filled with undefeated fighters, is more interesting than watching another round of lightweight hopefuls pull pranks on one another. But at the end of the day, there just isn't as much intrigue and interest in seeing each season hit the same familiar beats while crawling towards a finale that ends up getting less attention than it probably deserves. Secondly, with the sheer volume of fight cards available on a weekly basis, both UFC and otherwise, the idea of investing an hour every Wednesday night to watch a slightly different version of something you've seen dozens of times in the past isn't all that appetizing. It was different when there weren't UFC events almost every weekend and access to a litany of other organizations. Getting to see a good scrap midweek was a way to satisfy your need for face-punching, but those cravings have been getting fully satiated every Friday, Saturday or Sunday for the last several years, making tuning into tough less of a necessity. Thirdly, the coaches are often put in the spotlight ahead of the athletes on their respective teams, with individual seasons serving as lengthy promotional vehicles for building interest into their upcoming clash. The trouble is that the tension either feels manufactured or doesn't really add to the anticipation people feel for their eventual meeting in the octagon. As much as Joanna Jedrzejczyk and Claudia Gadelha genuinely did not like each other, their back-and-forth exchanges while coaching opposite one another on season 23 didn't suddenly make their showdown once the series wrapped any more compelling. It was already a highly anticipated rematch between the top two fighters in the strawweight division at the time, and anyone who invested time in watching them get testy with each other on Tough was already keyed up to see them run it back during International Fight Week. And finally, the introduction of Dana White's Tuesday Night Contenders series last summer kind of ethered The Ultimate Fighter, as the Fight Pass program focused on the stories of the athletes competing and viewers didn't have to sift through 13 weeks of episodes in order to find out who would land a UFC contract. Combine the advent and success of the Contenders series with the fact that many top prospects are opting to simply continue competing on the regional circuit in order to get their shot at the UFC, and it starts to feel like The Ultimate Fighter could be reaching its end relatively soon. The unfortunate reality as a result of the overall product being stale and various other alternatives exist, fans and observers are no longer investing as much time into The Ultimate Fighter as they did in the past, and the talented competitors still using the reality TV vehicle as a means to try and break into the UFC are largely getting lost in the shuffle. The ironic thing about this is that one of the chief criticisms levied against the UFC is that the organization doesn't do a good enough job cultivating and promoting emerging talents, but fans had numerous weeks to get to know each of the 39 fighters currently ranked in the top 15 in their respective divisions spent during their time on Tough, and most ended up being overlooked or ignored. A handful garnered attention during their season and maintained it once their actual UFC careers kicked off. Michael Bisping and Kelvin Gastelum come to mind, but for the most part, even current champs like Nama Yunus, Dillashaw and Whittaker had moments where fans weren't all that interested in their exploits, only to turn around and blast the UFC when they ascended into contention without much fanfare. The format may be stale, but there are still ultra-talented fighters coming through the Ultimate Fighter pipeline, and even if you're not watching the show, familiarizing yourself with the cream of the crop and following their progress once they officially enter the octagon is a good way to get acquainted with some potential future contenders.